Hi, I'm Brad with Gigabyte Grove, and on today's video, we're going to talk about how to build a whole network ad blocking device that helps protect your privacy and stop tracking websites and tracking devices from sending your information to places you don't want it. In today's video, we're just going to use a simple Raspberry Pi Zero, but stick around and find out how you can do it for yourself. All right, so the first question that everyone's going to ask is, what is DNS filtering? So DNS filtering is where you put a device on your network, in this case, a Raspberry Pi Zero. You plug that into your router and then route all of your network's traffic through this. This then removes anything that you have in it or anything that's malware or ads or anything that is tracking or collecting your data that maybe you don't want sent out, and it removes it and sends it into what's called the network black hole. Now, the long and skinny of this is, and for those less tech savvy, this actually helps you prevent companies from getting that information by basically taking what your computer or what that device is asking for and giving it a zero IP address or a null IP address, an IP address that doesn't link, doesn't go anywhere, doesn't do anything. So your device, your computer, will actually just fail to load those specific requirements that are actually trying to track what you don't want to be tracked. So things like your Roku TV, Roku boxes, Amazon Alexas, Google Homes, they collect statistic and user information, and this actually prevents that information from being sent back to them. Today we're going to use a piece of software called AdGuard Home. There are other ones out there. Pi-hole is another big one, but we're not going to use Pi-hole. Specifically, I don't like Pi-hole because it's kind of restricted in its usability. You can't really add on to it a lot, and the lists for it aren't as widely available as I feel that AdGuard Home is. I've also had better experience, I've had better results with AdGuard Home. I used Pi-hole for about 4 years. To varying results. I mean, it worked for the most part, but it wasn't looking for the level of restrictive filtering that I was looking for. You know, we were still, every so often, my Roku TV would still send something out, or my Netflix would still do this, or my phone would do that because there was an app that, you know, was trying to track something. AdGuard Home, at least for my setup, for my home network, has about an 80 to 90% block rate for stuff that I don't want to go through. So let's jump over to the computer. We're going to take a look at what we are actually going to need to get this project. So keep in mind, one thing I do want to say is that you can use any hardware that you want. You can use a simple desktop computer. You know, if you have lying around a old computer, a hardware, old something that has network ports and a processor, can be either ARM like this is, or it can be an x86 or 64 processor, an old Dell Pentium if you got one of those lying around. This works great. It only needs to have one network port on the back of it. That's all you need. If you have two, great, but you only need one. If you're only dealing with one network, one is going to be all you're going to use anyway. So, I mean, it is what it is. Let's take a look at the computer or at the desk and see what we've got down there today. All right, so on the desk today, it's pretty simple. We only have a few items. So this is a Raspberry Pi Zero, regular original Raspberry Pi Zero. This one's going to look a little bit different. I have a hat. It's called a hat. It's basically a little device that connects to the back of the board using contacts. This actually gives me an Ethernet port right here on the front of it, which is really all I need for this specific thing. It also expands out because these don't have USB. They use these micro connectors for power and for USB. We're not going to do that. I don't feel like messing around with dongles. If I want to do USB or Ethernet, I literally just want to be able to plug it in. So you can ignore this blue board on the top for my specific installation, but just know you need to have at least one Ethernet port on your device. We'll talk more about the Raspberry Pi Zero here in a little bit. I'll actually post a link to where I got this on AliExpress. I bought two of these, two Raspberry Pi Zeros and two of these boards, and I'll tell you what, it was the best $15 I ever spent. Anyway, let's continue on. We've got an SD card reader. This actually, I got this off of Amazon. This does both micro and regular size SDs, and I actually really like it. I think this was also $15 on Amazon, but I'll throw a link to that as well in the description. Then we just have a simple SD card. I believe this is a 32, yeah, this is a 32 gigabyte, just Lexar simple SD card. As long as it is a class 10 card, which the class 10 cards are held kind of to a higher standard, they last a little bit longer. All you need really is one of these. And then what you need for power, we've got a micro USB for power. That's for the Raspberry Pi. And then we have Ethernet, which will actually connect it to the rest of the network. So the first thing that we've got to actually do is we've got to prepare this SD card. So we're going to cut over to the computer. And for this specific installation, we're going to put Raspberry Pi OS on this. But if you are using Windows, you can just install, you can skip this and install the Windows client. If you're using a Linux virtual machine, or you're using a Raspberry Pi, your setup will be the same as what I'm doing. However, if you're using a Mac, that's a little more complicated, and I would refer you to the GitHub page for AdGuard Home, which we're going to look at in a little bit anyway, and I'll make sure to notate where specifically you need to go based on your operating system. So let's go ahead and cut over, and we're going to start doing some work on preparing the actual SD card. So for my simple, layman's terms, all you got to do basically is you take your SD card, go ahead and plug it into the reader, and then you plug it into the computer. So let's take a look at how to prepare our SD card for our Raspberry Pi. Now, the Raspberry Pi Imager is actually a really easy piece of software to use. All you do is you go in and choose device. So I'm using a Raspberry Pi Zero, not a 2.0 or a 0.2. I'm using a regular one. So I'm going to go down, select Raspberry Pi, choose OS. Now, this is an important distinction to make. If you're using a Raspberry Pi, you need to know what version it is. So I'm using an original Raspberry Pi Zero, which is a 32-bit system. So I'm going to click on Raspberry Pi Other, and I'm going to do the light version, 32-bit, which has no desktop interface. So one important thing that I will tell you is if you're using a Raspberry Pi or anything that's low power, you want to make sure it runs in what's called headless mode. So headless mode means that it has no desktop interface, and it's literally just a command prompt. For this specific use case, you are very unlikely to ever need to log into the command side. You'll actually be using a web interface for what we're doing today. So don't get discouraged. It's not something that is super technical. Setting this up is going to be the most technical part about this, and I'm going to walk through it with you. This is the same thing as if you were to use Linux or if you were to use Mac, you're going to manage this through a web interface. So realistically, whether you're running Windows or you're running Linux, Raspberry Pi, Mac OS, you're running it on a spaghetti noodle, none of that matters because the day-to-day operations for AdGuard Home are going to be through your web browser. So with that being said, the next step for Raspberry Pi Imager is we're going to select where we want to actually put this data. So we're going to hit choose storage. And on my screen, it's the H drive, but I know that is my 32 gig SD card. So what you want to make sure that you're not erasing any type of external storage that you have. So any external hard drives or anything that you have plugged in that is a hard drive where you store stuff that's not your internal hard drive, anything that's plugged into your USB ports that you could store data on, I would make sure that you remove them before you run Raspberry Pi Imager, because you don't want to accidentally click on the wrong one.
Gigabyte Grove is not responsible for any loss of data because you didn't unplug something external and chose the wrong drive.
And have a bad day. So I'm going to go ahead and click on my 32 gig and click next. Now with Raspberry Pi Imager, and one of the reasons I actually love these devices and the software that the Raspberry Pi Foundation has put together, is that it allows you to customize it before it actually writes it to the SD card. Back in the olden days, 3-4 years ago, you would have to manually edit a text file to change information like enabling SSH or the username and password, or all the variables that you could edit with these would have to be done in a text file before it booted for the first time. With the Raspberry Pi Imager, it asks you, hey, do you want to customize this? So we do. I'm going to go ahead and click on Edit Settings. I already have the settings in here that I want. AdGuard.local is going to be our host name. Pi is going to be our username. I've already set my super secret password, and the time zone and keyboard layout is correct. I am in South Central Georgia, so I'm in the Eastern time zone, which is America, New York, and I'm in the United States. So the next thing we want to do for the Raspberry Pi is we want to go to the Services tab, and we want to make sure that Enable SSH is ticked. And the reason is because if you don't have SSH ticked, you're not going to be able to access this. It may be on, it may be booted, but you can't connect to it unless you have a keyboard and mouse and display. So because this is going to be on our local network, we don't need to worry about public key authentication. We don't have to worry about any security warnings. As long as you know and trust the hardware that you are putting this on, you don't really need to worry about SSH too much. There shouldn't really be anything under options that we need to worry about. No, that's more for the software itself. I am going to go ahead and uncheck Enable Telemetry just because we don't need that. And I'm going to go ahead and hit Save. Now, you notice that Edit Settings turned blue. Well, it turned blue to tell us that our custom settings have been applied and will be written to our SD card. So now it's just as simple as hitting yes. We want to go ahead and do this. It's going to ask us again, hey, everything on this device is going to be erased. Are you sure that you want to continue? Well, yes, I want to erase this. I want to start it, start anew, start fresh. So now it's actually going through and it's trying to prepare the disk. So while it's going through and doing that, a couple of things that I want to make sure that everyone's aware of. If you are using a Raspberry Pi is a unique type of computer. It is a single board computer, meaning everything that it needs to operate on a bare minimum level is already on this board. You can extend it by adding what's called a hat. So I have the hat, as I said earlier, that actually adds Ethernet and USB to it, and an additional power adapter here on the side. So with that being said, this device is perfect for me because of its size and its extensibility. The other thing that I want to make sure that everyone's aware of is when you use a Raspberry Pi, the Raspberry Pi Imager takes the smallest image humanly possible and puts it on your SD card. So what that means is if you have a 32 gig SD card, your Raspberry Pi OS, before it boots for the first time, your Raspberry Pi OS only takes up about 4 gigabytes of that SD card. Then when you plug it into your Raspberry Pi, whether it be a 0 or a Raspberry Pi 4 or 5 or 3 or whatever, it will then take about 5 minutes, and what it'll do is it'll resize so that your operating system can use the entire SD card. So for example, I have a 32 gig SD card that we're going to slap into this Raspberry Pi Zero. So with that being said, the original image is only going to be 4 gigabytes. Well, on first boot, it's going to go through and it's going to resize that 4 gigabytes to 32. So this thing can use the entire SD card for what we're using it for, which is AdGuard Home. Now, if we go back to the screen, you can see that our image has been written. We are all set, ready to go for our first boot. So I'm going to go ahead and hit continue. By default, what Windows is supposed to do, and it doesn't always do this, in my experience, it never does it, but it should go through and actually eject the card for you or eject the disk for you. So then it's just a matter of going through, pulling your SD card out, taking it out of the reader, and with a Raspberry Pi, you have there is a little SD card reader right here. You just slip it right into that, push, and it's ready to go. So this is actually ready to boot up, be powered on, and turned on for the first time. So I'm going to go ahead and cut the video here. I'm going to give it about 5 minutes to do its first boot up. While you're waiting for it to boot up, what I would recommend, if you're using a Raspberry Pi, you need to know the IP address that this thing is going to get. So to do that, you need to log into your router and get what's called a DHCP list table. Basically, that's a list of all the things on your network and their IP addresses. If you don't know how to get any of that information, that's fine. Whether you have an Android or iOS device, there's a simple app called Fing, F-I-N-G, that you can download and run while you're connected to your Wi-Fi network, and it will show you all of the devices that you have. So if you have a Raspberry Pi and you changed the host name or the name of your Raspberry Pi, it should show up on Fing as a Raspberry Pi with the name that you set and the IP address. So that's the easiest way to get it. You can also use a program like Angry IP Scanner or Advanced IP Scanner. Both of those will also give it to you as well, but that has to be after the file resize, which again takes about 5 minutes. So I'm going to go ahead and cut, let mine resize, and we'll stop back here in a second. All right, so with our Raspberry Pi rebooted, now we need to get in and make the changes that we have to make. So we're going to go back to the computer. Now, this is where, if you're using Linux, you have to have a not much, but some knowledge of how to update your system at the absolute very least. So I like to use for SSH, which is remoting into the command line of a Linux or now Windows 10, Windows 11, Windows system, where you can basically get a command prompt to make changes to it. Because we're going to be using Linux, or we're going to be using Raspbian, which is a form of Ubuntu and Debian, I'm going to be doing the commands based on that. But make sure that you know what yours uses. So if you're using anything that's based off of Red Hat Linux, so like Rocky, Alpine, or any other form of Linux that uses the Yum package manager, you're going to be using Yum. For this, we use apt or apt-get. And for Windows, there's a whole different set of you have Windows updates and stuff like that. So what we want to do is we want to make sure that we are connecting to our system. So by this time, you already should know the IP address of the device that we're going to be managing. So make sure that you have that offhand. So going back to the computer, we're going to type in the IP address of this system. I know mine is 192.168.0.124. Now, by default, SSH runs on port 22. We want to leave 22 alone. I'm using a program called Putty, P-U-T-T-Y, Putty SSH. It's a free program that you can get on your own. I will go ahead and link it in the description down below. There are other software out there. There's other flavors of SSH management software. I use probably 4, 5, 6 of them on a daily basis. But if I need to get something done and I need to get it done quickly, or if I'm just showing someone how to manage SSH on a single system, Putty is usually the one that I would recommend. Plus, there's a whole suite of other features. But Putty is a great beginner level, entry level SSH management software. So anyway, I'm going to go ahead and hit enter or open. So when you first connect to a system via SSH, the first thing that you're going to get specifically with Putty is this big warning, big scary warning that says, warning, potential security breach. The host key doesn't blah, 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 blah. So what that is your computer has never seen the computer that you're connecting to before. There's no trust between the two systems. They don't know what each other is. So this warning is basically telling you, hey, wait, hold on a second. I have no idea who this is. But AdGuard Home, we are doing this on your local network. This will not directly be connected to the internet. This will not directly be connected to anything outside of your home or business or wherever you're setting this up. So for us, SSH doesn't necessarily matter. So we don't need to go through and set up passwordless authentication or use public keys or any of that stuff. You could just use a password. That's fine. As long as you trust the devices that you connect to your home network, this will never be an issue. So we're going to go ahead and hit accept because for us, it doesn't matter. You're going to type in the username for your system. For us, it's Pi because we use the Raspberry Pi Imager and we set the password as Pi. So then I'm also going to type in my super secret password that I pre-configured into the Raspberry Pi Imager and hit enter to log in. So now we're in. We can see Pi at AdGuard. AdGuard is the name of our system and Pi is the user that we're signed in as. So Pi at AdGuard. So now we're at what's called the prompt, or what are we doing next, basically, is what the computer is asking. Well, the first thing I do, because I like organization, I'm going to clear out the screen by doing clear, which gives me no fuss and no muss above where I'm actually working right now. Now, because we're actually using Linux, and this is a Debian form of Linux, Debian enforces what's called sudo or super user rules. So for anything that is not root, which is the master account for Linux, you have to type sudo before it, unless you go through the customization and add the user to sudo and blah, 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 blah. We're not going to get into any of that stuff. That's not something that's relevant to what we're doing today. I'm just explaining what sudo is. So any command that we issue, we need to type sudo before it. I'm really bad at that. I tend to forget to type in sudo because I'm usually operating as root, given that I work in IT for a living. So the first thing that we need to do, being that this is a brand new, fresh Linux installation, we need to go through and we need to actually update this specific piece of software to make sure that it knows where to go and get updates. So to do that, we type in sudo apt-get update. So what that does is that goes out to the internet and it says, it hits a server and it says, hey, where do I go for updates? So it has Linux has a bunch of lists, or Debian-based has a bunch of lists. Well, actually, you know what? Linux has a bunch of lists that it goes through and it checks to make sure that it knows where updates are, where it can install software from, all of that information. So it goes out to the internet, reaches out to servers, gets all that information, brings it down, and it'll periodically update that information so that it knows where all of that is. Now, when this is done, we're going to do an actual upgrade. So one thing that I want to mention about upgrades is it depends on the speed of your system and how long since your operating system was upgraded. So you always want to make sure that if you're going to be installing a piece of software like AdGuard Home, that you have the latest security and functional upgrades for your system. Because if you're going to be putting internet traffic through this, if you have something in your house that's compromised, you do not want it to get to this server or to this system, because then it may have access to everything else on your network. That's kind of how networking works, but for the long and skinny, I mean, we're not going to do a deep dive into networking. That's something for another video. So now our apt update is done. We're going to do an apt upgrade. So sudo apt-get upgrade. Now, I can just hit enter and this will go, but it's going to start asking me questions. I don't want to answer questions. I don't need to answer questions. So for my specific example, I'm just going to do a -y. That says any questions you get answered, just answer them yes. So I'm going to type that in and go ahead and hit enter. Now, depending on the speed of your hardware, this may take some time. As you can see from the screen capture that I've got going on for the SSH session, or for our command prompt session, for those that are less tech savvy, It's going to take a little bit because right now it's going out and it's verifying that all of the packages it needs to update are still available. And then it's actually going to do the upgrade. So this could take anywhere between 5 minutes and half an hour, depending on the speed of your hardware. So what I'm going to end up doing is I'm going to take this and I'm going to put this in a time lapse so that you guys can kind of see what's going on here. So we'll be back once the time lapse is actually over. All right, so now we're ready to continue. Now, we just updated the operating system. What we want to do now is we need to reboot in order to apply the settings. So for this, I'm going to go ahead and do sudo reboot. Now, because we made changes to the operating system via updates, this may take a minute for it to update and actually come back online. Because we're using Linux, it should be relatively faster. If you're using anything like Windows, which uses Windows Update and all that stuff, that can take some time. Go ahead and feel free to pause the video while we wait for your system to come back up. I am actually going to get us prepared for the next step. So we're going to cut straight back to getting AdGuard Home installed. So now that we're fully rebooted, we're ready to install AdGuard Home. So with AdGuard Home, it makes it really, really easy to install it on Linux, Windows, and Mac. It's a little bit more complicated, but it's not impossible to do it. So if you're installing on Windows, there is an exe file that you will run. You can go to the GitHub page, and I'll go ahead and post the link right down here on the screen that you could just go ahead and type in, or the link will also be in the description down below. I'm going to write a guide and put it on gigabytegrove.com under the tutorial section on how to set this up. So there will be example code on our website once this video goes out that you can just follow, copy and paste, and go from there. It will be on this, though, on the Raspberry Pi, but it'll also mention things like how to install on Windows. So with that being said, what we're going to do is we're just going to scroll all the way up and go to releases here. Now this releases will actually show you all the different versions that are there. You can see there's quite a few different versions here. So you've got AMD 64, 36. These are free DSB, which is a form of Linux. This Linux AMD is something that you would use for manual installation on Linux. Then down below you have the Windows one, so i386 or 386, which is like the older style, like Pentium 4s. AMD 64 is anything newer, so like a 64-bit, something running Windows 10 or Windows 7 or Windows 11, Windows 8, anything like that. And then you have ARM 64, would be like a Microsoft Surface or any smaller Microsoft-based stuff. We're not going to do a manual installation, so we're actually going to go right back. We're going to scroll down because we're doing Linux, and we're going to look at automated install. So this is for Linux, Unix, Mac OS, FreeDSB, and OpenDSB. Or sorry. This is for FreeDSB and BSD. My God, I think I'm having some medical issues right now. FreeBSD and OpenBSD. You can tell it's early in the morning and I haven't had my appropriate fill of coffee for the day yet. So all we need to be able to get this done is copy and paste this simple one line of code. Now, we need to go through and actually hit the little copy icon. So we have it copied. It's sitting on the clipboard for our computer that we're connected to. We have to open up SSH again so that we can run this command on our Raspberry Pi. So I already have PuTTY ready to go. Alt-Tab. 192.168.0.124 is my IP address. Again, port 22. Make sure that you input your IP address. You should already have it committed to memory at this point because we used it to update your system before. If you're using Windows, you don't need to do this. All you have to do is go to the GitHub page, scroll down, or click releases, scroll down to the Windows appropriate version for whatever you're using. Most of you will end up using an AMD 64, and then you just follow the instructions on how to install it in the zip file that you get, or in the compressed file that you get, whether it's a zip, RAR, or tar.gz, they're all the same thing. They're all compressed files. So we're going to go ahead and connect, and notice that we did not get the message about trust between the two systems because we've already connected to it. Pi is my username with my super secret password. We'll go ahead and put that in here. And then this will look familiar. We're going to have the same system, same warning, same prompt that we had before. Again, I'm going to go through and do clear. That's just me. I want to clear the screen out. I want to start from scratch. I don't want to see any of the stuff for the operating system. So one of the other reasons why I like PuTTY so much for SSH or command prompt management is because if you have something on your clipboard and you want to input it into your remote system, the best way to actually do that is a simple right click. So if you right click, you can see that the command that if we look at the command or the SSH session that I have open, you can see just by right clicking, it took that single line of code that we got from GitHub and it pasted it right in there. Now we just have to hit enter and let it run. That's it. It'll go through, it'll download everything, install it, it will decompress everything, and it'll put it where it's supposed to go. Now, at the end of this installation, you're going to get displayed back to you the IP address of your Raspberry Pi and a port number. We need to open up your favorite browser, whatever that may be, and go to that IP address and that port number. So we're going to do that now. So if you're running Linux, we're done with PuTTY at this point, and we don't need to interface with it anymore. So you can actually go ahead and close that. Now we're just going to be focusing on configuring AdGuard, which can be done through your web browser. You're going to take your favorite web browser, and you're going to type in the IP address and port number, which should be 3000, into Google Chrome, Firefox, Microsoft Edge, whatever your favorite browser is, and hit enter. You'll be presented with the screen that we're looking at here. So this is the Welcome to AdGuard screen. So go ahead and click the Get Started button, and then it will ask you to start configuring it. Now, for your web interface, I'm going to start off by saying that everyone should just leave this setting alone. Or leave these settings alone. But if you're a little more on the advanced side and you want to tinker a little bit, my professional recommendation is going to be taking the admin interface, which is the first thing it asks you to configure, and changing it to only be the IP address that you want it connected to. So if you're managing multiple networks, say you're running this, I'm going to go off screen here for a second. Say that you're running this on a system like this that has multiple network ports on it. And this one is going to be connected to your main network, and this one will be connected to a guest network. So what you want is you want that web interface to only be accessible on port 1. You do not want your guests to be able to get in and manage AdGuard Home. So that is the only situation where really you would change this option on here with your web interfaces. Otherwise, just leave it alone. If you only have one network, you don't need to worry about changing it. For DNS, for the next section, there it says DNS server, always, 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 unless you know what you're doing, leave it on all interfaces. Because if you change it, if using this again as an example, if you change it, this port may be able to answer requests and this one won't, or this one will and this one won't, and you could get into an issue with a misconfiguration. If you're installing a single DNS server in your home network, business network, anything, and this is it, don't change that setting. All right. So with that being said, we're going to just scroll all the way down to the bottom. We're not going to touch it. We're not going to do anything. Okay. It does mention static IP addresses. So what that is you have a single IP address for this system and it will never change. Do not, under any circumstances, set your static IP address on the machine itself. The best way to do this is to set it through your router. So your modem or your router, whether you have a router from your internet service provider or you have one that you went out and purchased yourself, like a TP-Link Deco system, or you're using Omada, Unify, anything, set the IP address in that, not on the system. And the reason I say that is because if you ever change equipment or you change something and you've set it on the device, well, this is headless. So now we have no way to get in there and actually change the IP address easily. However, if you do it on the router itself, unless you physically change the router should always give this the same IP address over and over and over. You can leave it unplugged for 6 months and plug it back in, and it'll still get the same IP address. As long as that static lease, it's called a lease, as long as that static lease is in your router, this device will always have the same IP address. Why is that important? Because everything on your network is actually going to be looking at the IP address that we put in, and it needs to stay the same. Because if it doesn't stay the same, you're not going to have internet access. So I would recommend looking at how to do that. Again, if you have a router, your internet service provider should have a way for you to get in and see what devices are on your network and how to set a static lease for one of them. Do not port forward, just static lease. You don't need to port forward to this, because port forwarding, port forwarding, you're opening a port to the internet, and the ports that this uses are already open to the internet. You don't need to open anything for this. And this being a DNS server, you don't want anything outside your home to be able to do lookup requests inside your home. So if you have like custom servers or custom links or anything like that, and everything is defined in this, you don't want stuff outside your home to be able to get the information about the stuff inside your home. So don't port forward. I can't say that enough. Anyway, we're on step 2 of 5. We're just going to go ahead and hit next. We're going to skip right through this. This is where you are going to go through and set up. So make sure that you enter a username you're going to remember and a password you're going to remember, because that is how you're going to get in to manage your AdGuard Home. So I'm not going to do this on screen because I don't want it to show any autocomplete or anything like that. But just make sure you enter a username. I suggest admin, especially since it's internal. But if you want to use like your first name, anything like that, that's fine. Just make sure that you're going to remember what you type in. All right, so I have gone through and entered in my credentials. I'm going to go ahead and hit next. And now we're done. So now you're going to get presented with a screen that shows you how to configure your devices. So when you're using AdGuard Home, the IP address that you want to use will be on the screen. It usually will be the second option down. If you're using something like a Raspberry Pi 4 or something that has both a Ethernet and Wi-Fi, make sure that you get both of those IP addresses. The reason is you want to set the Ethernet IP address, so whatever the IP address is for the Ethernet port, you want to set that as your primary DNS. And then the wireless one you want to set as your secondary DNS. And the reason is because if it goes down, you want it to be able to fall back to the wireless. If something, hypothetically, let's say something happens to that Ethernet cable, You want to be able to still connect to the server, but over Wi-Fi. That'll still verify, or that'll still make sure that your requests, anything that you look up, any information that's being requested, goes out to the internet over Wi-Fi or Ethernet. It's a redundant thing. You want to make sure that you have that. So down below, you actually can choose router, Windows, Mac OS, Android, your iOS, and DNS privacy information. And it'll actually walk you through how to set your DNS on those specific things. Now, every router is different. No matter what internet service provider you have, no matter, if you have AT&T, you have Spectrum, you have T-Mobile Home Internet, they're all different. Every last one of them. All of their equipment is different. All of their router settings are different. Check with your internet service provider or the documentation that came with your router or with your modem, if you're using a modem, to figure out how to actually change the IP addresses in your network by default. If you're using something like a TP-Link Deco system or Omada or Unify or some type of managed system where you have a central server or central piece of equipment that everything connects to, usually there's some sort of web interface or a mobile app that you can actually use to input that information. I don't have anything that I can actually show you guys without showing you how my personal network works, which obviously I don't want to do for security reasons. But what I'm going to do is I am going to try to show you guys for this specific computer how we can take the computer that I'm screen recording on and put it into AdGuard, so that AdGuard, or set it to use AdGuard, so that we can see some of the stuff that it actually does. Allow it to try to connect and get some metrics and stuff like that. And we can take a look at some of the traffic that's going through it. All right, so if you're using Windows, one of the simplest and easiest ways to do this is to define or set up and force it to use your AdGuard DNS server that we just set up. Keep in mind, you need to know the IP addresses. I can't say that enough. The number of times that I've told people, hey, what's the IP address for this? And you've just looked at it, they don't remember it. So make sure that you write it down, put it on a piece of paper in front of you so that you have them easy access and you don't have to just keep looking them up. So most of the time, your Ethernet is going to look like this, what we're looking at on the computer right now. And we need to go through it and we need to actually change our DNS, our defined DNS server. So we're going to click on Properties. And under Properties, there's going to be a section called Internet Protocol version 4, TCP/IP v4. This is what we want. We don't want to worry about anything else. We don't want to do IPv6. If your network is using IPv4, this is going to be what you're going to do. By default, most internal home networks use IPv4. It's just easier. It's been around longer. Blah, 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 blah. So we're going to double click on it, or you can just come down here and click Properties. And this is where you're actually going to change your DNS server. So you don't have to use the following IP address. You can leave that alone. We're more focused on the section at the bottom where it says use the following DNS servers. So go ahead and tick that box, and then you'll see that these two boxes down below will actually light up. So our preferred DNS server, 192.168.0.124 is my AdGuard instance. You're going to want to put your Ethernet in the preferred and the Wi-Fi, if you have a secondary, in the alternate. So that will make sure that if your Ethernet goes down, it'll go to your Wi-Fi one, or the Wi-Fi connection for your AdGuard Home server. Or if it has two Ethernets, put in port 1, port 2, or port 2, port 1, whatever, however you want to do it. Just make sure that you have two. For my specific one, I'm only going to do a single IP address because I only have a single Ethernet to this device. However, in my home, so here at Gigabyte Grove, on our network here, I actually have 3 AdGuard systems that are synchronized with each other. So when one changes, the other two will automatically grab it, and they're in a row. So for example, the IP address for server number 1 ends in 2, server 2 is 3, server 3 is 4. So my DNS servers for my network are 2, 3, 4. And the reason I have it set up that way is so that if there's ever an issue with the server that sits on 2, it'll look at 3 and 4. If there's ever an issue with 2 or with 3, it'll look at 2 and 4, so on and so forth. So you want to make sure that basically you have redundancy, because otherwise you're not going to have internet access. Internet is going out to the, how the internet works is you're going out to the internet, or you're going to what your computer knows websites are located at, and it's trying to load the IP address based on the information it knows. If it doesn't know it, it's going to go out to the internet to look it up through DNS, through a server like we just set up. And if it can't get the DNS locally, it can't go any further than that. So you want to make sure that you have DNS in your house. There's a shirt that I think I might have Andrew make for me. There's a shirt that says it was DNS. It's always DNS. In IT, whenever there's an issue, 85 to 90% of the time, it's always DNS. So just keep that in mind. That's another reason why I like AdGuard Home, is it's a completely touchless system where it manages itself. If you ever have an issue with it or it gets stuck, all you have to do is unplug it, plug it back in, and in about 30 seconds, you'll have internet again. But even the interruptions with that are extremely rare. It's a very robust, very good system to have. Kudos to the guys at AdGuard, the AdGuard team, for actually making such a rock-solid project. Well done. Anyway, we're going to go ahead and hit enter, and we're going to hit close. And close again. And we're done. So now what we're going to do is we're going to switch over to our Google Chrome, and we're going to take a look at the dashboard for AdGuard. Now that we've been connected for a little bit, we're going to take a look at the dashboard for AdGuard and see some of the things that it's collected from there. All right, so when you connect to AdGuard for the first time, it is going to prompt you to log in. You're going to log in with the same username and password that we set up during the installation, and you'll be presented with a neat, nice little dashboard. So let's go ahead and take a look at that. And the dashboard will actually start showing us some statistics. Now, what I will tell you is, while we were cutting away, I went and loaded up gigabytegrove.com and let the computer kind of run for a little bit. So it had Windows and some of the other RMM stuff that I have on here, remote management, and all that. I'm also going to go all the way to the bottom and put this in dark mode because I like dark mode. That's just a me thing. And just by looking at the dashboard here, we can actually see that 46 queries were already made through our new AdGuard server from this computer alone, which is 192.168.0.113. None of them were blocked by the filters because we don't have filters set up yet. So what I'm going to go ahead and do is I'm going to go all the way up here to settings, and I'm going to click on general settings. So under general settings are some of the settings that we can add, change, or do whatever we need to do. Now, one thing that I would recommend, especially if you have children in your house, make sure that you enable the AdGuard parental control web service. So in my home, my son has 2 of his own AdGuard servers that have parental controls on them. So it's an extra defense on top of his Google family link that prevents him from seeing websites he shouldn't, or getting Google results that he shouldn't, ads that he shouldn't, tracking information that he shouldn't, because he's under 13. And COPPA requires that anyone under 13 not have their data be collected or distinguish that they're an individual under 18. If you don't know what COPPA is, just go ahead and Google it. I'm not going to explain it in this video. But I'm going to go ahead and enable it just for giggles here. And one of the other things with AdGuard Home is 90% of the time the settings that you change are reflective instantly. You don't really have to change or apply changes, reboot it, do any of that other stuff. It just works. There are some stuff where you actually do have to hit save or apply changes, but it makes sense on why, because if you change it and it applies instantly, you're going to break something. But the other thing that I do recommend is if you scroll down here, you can do the ignored domains. So ignored domains is you have a website that you go to frequently for work or for your business or whatever. And AdGuard is just blocking the crap out of it. It's blocking stuff that you need or that breaks the website or whatever. You can go in and you can put in the domain name of the website, omitting or leaving out the www part. Don't just copy and paste the domain in there. Make sure that you actually type the domain name in there. This is not where you will unblock things. This is only for as needed. I will show you how to unblock things in a second here, but just know that ignored domains should only be used if you know the website is safe and you don't want AdGuard to process or filter anything through it. I don't want to hear anything about, oh, well, Netflix is doing this and that. Hey man, find the list that's doing it, disable the list. We'll go over lists here in a second, but don't put Netflix.com in an ignored domain. Utilize it and actually make the filter work for you. Don't just bypass it, because then there's no point in you having AdGuard Home. Anyway, so you also want to keep statistics enabled. I like to go all the way and do 90 days. The reason is I'm a data buff. I like to see what's going on with my network over the course of time. So with 90 days, your statistics, you can see what happened over the last 90 days, what happened over the last 30 days, 7 days, 24 hours, or longer if you select a custom one. But the important thing is you want to know what's going on. This also affects the dashboard and what the data and the data retention on the dashboard, what the data actually shows you or how long it shows you. So we're just going to keep scrolling down. There's nothing else underneath that. So the next thing I want to do is our DNS settings. DNS settings are extremely important in AdGuard. And the reason is because you have what's called an upstream DNS setting. So your upstream DNS is where is your AdGuard looking for the information that it doesn't know. Only put in servers that you trust. Most people will commonly put in things like 8.8.8.8 or 1.1.1.1, things like that. By default, AdGuard Home uses Quad 9. It uses their HTTP DNS, which is really reliable. I haven't seen any problems with it. I also like to do Quad 9's 9 IP address, and then the obligatory 1.1.1.1, 1.0.0.1, 8.8.8.8, and the 8.8.4.4. So those are the servers that it's going to look up to if it ever doesn't know something. That's the list of servers it knows that it can safely look up to. The next setting is load balancing, or how do you want me to look up? So what they'll do is it will do, you can either do load bearing, that's construction. You can do load balancing, parallel requests, or whatever the fastest response was. So don't just choose fastest response because you think it sounds the best. So parallel requests allows you to speed it up by hitting every single server at the exact same time. But if a server is down, that could slow down your requests. The chances of a DNS server like Quad 9 or Cloudflare or Google DNS is pretty low, but the resolution time, if one server is running a little bit slower than all the other ones, it's going to slow you down. So don't just choose it because you think it's going to be faster. Actually look at your server and how it performs over the first couple of weeks that you have it in, the first couple of months, the first year, and adjust your settings accordingly to make sure that you're getting the most out of the system. For us, I am actually going to go ahead and do parallel requests, because parallel requests, I know that the ones that I put in here are fast, they're reliable, and on top of that, I have a 10 gig connection here. So the 10 gig connection that I have also has its own upstream DNS servers that it gives to AdGuard in case it can't connect to any of its. That's something completely separate on my system here. You guys most likely will not have that unless you have an enterprise network at your home or office, like a robust enterprise network. One of the other things that I want to make sure that we talk about here, And enough people that have done AdGuard Home do not talk about this. You want to make sure that you specify fallback DNS servers. This is kind of what I was talking about with my enterprise network having fallback DNS servers. You can program this directly into AdGuard Home. So these would be things like the DNS servers that your internet service provider gives you, or what comes out of your modem, or if you have a static IP address, what DNS servers they provide you for that. You want to make sure that you put those into your fallback, so that way, if any of the public ones are down, you still have something to fall back to. So we don't need to worry about anything else that we have on the screen. Bootstrap DNS servers, we don't need to worry about that stuff. Private reverse DNS servers, we don't need to worry about that stuff. Those are all out of the scope of this video. Those are more for if you have internal stuff for host files, and it's way more advanced than we need to worry about. So we're not going to touch anything with that. But what I do want to do is I want to hit apply. So we're going to save the settings that we put in. The other thing that I would recommend is test your upstreams. So you'll get a box in the lower right-hand corner that'll actually say specified DNS servers are working correctly. That's how you know the servers that you put in are resolvable. Resolvable means they can be contacted and they're sending information back. That's what that basically means. So we're not going to change anything else in here. We don't really need to. There is one other thing that I will talk about briefly, but I'm not going to talk about how to customize it, change it, anything like that. And that is blocking mode. So blocking mode in AdGuard Home allows you to tell the device that had something blocked how you want it to inform you, the user, that it was blocked. So you can do things like a refused, an NX domain, a null IP, or set it to a custom IP. So for example, with my son's network, anything that he's not supposed to be getting to, or anything that we have blocked or is blocked under parental controls or anything like that, it points to a web server that we have locally on our network. It'll point to that, which will then display a web page to him that says, it's been noted. We know it'll capture the URL that he went to, the timestamp, the computer or device that he tried to connect from, not necessarily to get him in trouble, but so that we know where it was tried to be accessed from, and we can try to have a conversation with him, gentle parenting style, have a conversation with him about, hey man, you're not supposed to be accessing that, or blah, blah, blah. The other good thing, and the other reason I like it, because this is more what it's been recently than anything bad, is it'll tell me things that are blocked that shouldn't be blocked. Like, for example, he loves Minecraft, and he likes to play games on his computer for Steam. There's a few things like BeamNG. It told me that BeamNG's resource library, things where he can go and get resources for BeamNG, was blocked. I don't know why it was blocked, because it wasn't on any of the lists, but it was blocked for some reason. The only reason we were able to find that out was because it logged his request to the BeamNG repository, or the library of stuff, and I was able to go through, figure out where that actually was, and then unblock it for him. Again, this is super advanced and not something you will need, but the fact that they have that feature in there, if you're a techie, if you're someone that likes to tinker or likes to mess around with stuff, you can actually present a message to your people, or the people that are connected to it, on that. So we're not going to change it. We're not going to set it up. We're not going to do any of that stuff. I just wanted to talk about the fact that it's there, that it exists in AdGuard Home. So AdGuard Home isn't just for home. You can use it for enterprise stuff too. And keep in mind, this is free. And to have a lot of the features that are in here for free is really, really awesome. So we're going to go all the way back up to the top here. The next thing that we're going to focus on here is the filters tab. So we're going to click on filters, and we're going to go to DNS block lists. So by default, AdGuard gives you 2 DNS block lists by default. Only one of them is enabled, and that's going to be the AdGuard DNS filter. This is one that they manage themselves. Although it's not always the most up-to-date, it is one that they manage themselves. The other one is called AdAway. And AdAway is really, really good, but it doesn't hit every single box. There are other ones, and you can create your own custom ones if you want to, but the AdGuard has 57,000 blocked rules or domains or things that it knows are ads. While that seems like a lot, you have to remember the internet is essentially infinite. That's not really a whole lot. So I'm going to go ahead and enable the AdAway one. But I want to add more. I want more stuff blocked. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to Add Block List down here at the bottom and choose from the list. So on here, you can see all of the other lists that you have the opportunity to block from. One of the biggest ones that I recommend is the One Host Lite list, Add AW Avenue, which blocks a lot of ads, Peter Lowe's block list, and Steven's blacklist. Those are the ones that I recommend, the 4 that I recommend the most people use. Go through each one of these and find out what they block. If you click on the little home next to the name, you can actually go to the GitHub page for that specific list. It'll show you information about the list. And then if you click the little information eye that's on there, you actually can preview the list and see if it blocks specific websites. So again, that's a little bit more advanced for people that don't understand it. We don't really need to go into how to view any of that stuff. Just know that if you need to enable additional lists, the ones that I have checked on the screen, the One Host Lite, AW Avenue, Peter Lowe's, and Steven's blacklist are the ones that I recommend. They will block pretty much 99% of the stuff that you need and almost none of the stuff you don't need. So go ahead and hit save. It will now go out to the internet. It will bring that information in and it will add it to your AdGuard system automatically. As you can see, we're already starting to get domains coming in or the lists coming in and being blocked in here. Now, if you look at the tab that says rules count, so we have 57,000 through the default, 6,500 through AdAway, another 3,500 through Peters, another 96,000 through One Host Lite, 121,000 from Steven's blacklist. And then the AW gives us another 691. And these are updated regularly. So your AdGuard will automatically go out and update these, or you could just check for updates by clicking check for updates. You don't necessarily need to do that, but you can. So we're going to let it finish this because I clicked check for updates, so I might as well let it finish. I don't think there's going to be any because I literally just downloaded these. Yeah, there's no updates. So I'm going to go back to dashboard here, and we can see that while we've been standing here, another 41 DNS queries were made. So let's take a look at what it's actually blocking. I'm going to click on query log here, and we can see that, okay, well, my semantic endpoint protection, Google APIs, Google Play, that's some play.google APIs, WPAD LAN, that is something that's a Windows thing. I don't understand what that is. I think it's looking for something on the local system. I haven't been able to figure out what's going on. Tactical RRM is a system that I use to manage Linux stuff here. Doesn't go out to the internet. It's literally just local here. And then we've got stuff from Google. So the Google stuff, the APIs, all that stuff. This is all stuff that is being is going through AdGuard right now. So one thing that you can note is that look at everything says processed. Now, one thing to notate is if you go through and we look at the list, we can see that it's processing everything. It's not blocking anything yet. So we have AdGuard Home, and we have, here's the Gigabyte Grove website. So let me go ahead and do a reload on the Gigabyte Grove website. Now, there's nothing, there's no ads, there's none of that on there, but what it does do is it goes out to Cloudflare and to Google Analytics, and there's other analytics software on it where it grabs the IP address, the browser, and I think the country and the city that you live in. so that we can do metrics and figure out where we're being supported from. So I went through and I did that. So let's go ahead and refresh the query log. And this part may take a second, but when we reload it, you'll see that, all right, well, we got some stuff in here now. So we've got some Google G-static, which is Google. I don't really see anything blocked in here because there's not really anything on. There's not really anything on our website that needs to be blocked. It's not really tracking it or doing anything. But if I were to go through and do a Google search, so let me do so I'm going to go ahead and just type that in. I'm going to go back to our website and I'm going to paste that in. Gigabyte Grove Earth Cam. So here's our Earth Cam right here. So let me go ahead and click that. I'm going to go ahead and bring up our Earth Cam on the video. Let it load, do all its stuff. Now, normally you can see what it looks like outside. It's not pretty outside today, but it is, it's what, 59 degrees. So it's not freezing. It's just not beautiful. Not beautiful blue skies yet. It's supposed to be nice today. We'll see what happens. Anyway, it went to Gigabyte Grove's EarthCam page, and EarthCam has analytics and ads and a bunch of other stuff. Now, what I will say is at the beginning of it loading the EarthCam video, there is supposed to be an ad. If you look at the browser that we have, there is no ad blocker, but it did not play an ad. So I'll go ahead and refresh the page, and let's see if it plays an ad. There is no ad, so we know our AdGuard is working. So let's go back to our AdGuard Home. We're going to refresh our system, and let's take a look at if we have anything on there that's blocked. So my suspicion is, yep, there it is. My suspicion is we're going to start getting stuff blocked, and you'll know that it's blocked because it's in red. Anything that is blocked will show up in red, and it'll show you the list that blocked it. So that is one of the benefits of using AdGuard Home. One of the other cool things, one of the things I like most about AdGuard Home is if you hover over this little eye here, if I could get my mouse to stay still, I got a hair flying around here for some reason, is that if you tap or if you hover over that little eye with the slash through it, it actually gives you the information about the request that was made. So the time, the date, what website, that it was a known tracker, so what the name of it is, the category, and what actually blocked it, or where that information came from, the protocol it used, the type of record that it tried to look up. For the lay person, that information is maybe not important or not relevant. But as you start to learn more about how DNS works and how your network is using it, this information is vital for tracking down issues. So for a specific example, if I go to this one right here, this blocked one, so you can actually see, hey, this Google doubleclick.net, it was made over plain DNS, but it blocked it because it's advertising. And the source was whotracks.me. So that actually, it's a AdGuard Home, and the list that comes into it is a consortium of users and not-for-profits bent on stopping tracking and excessive advertising on the internet. And it's crowdsourced information. So whotracks.me found this information, put it into the AW Avenue ads rule, and then AdGuard picked it up, put it into AdGuard Home, and now you don't have to worry about seeing ads from DoubleClick because someone else 3 chains down the line did the work for you. So AdGuard Home. That's about it. That's actually it. What I wanted to show you in this video. We can see if we go back to the dashboard, we've got 10 things that were blocked. 5.5% of what our computer downloaded for our web traffic since this has been up was blocked. 194 requests went out to the internet, and of those 194, 10 were blocked for advertising, tracking, or any of that information. The fastest processing time that we had was 94 milliseconds, which, if you think about it, is that. So, or not fastest, average processing time was 94 milliseconds. The one thing that I will point out is the hardware that you install this on makes a big difference. So if you're putting this on a Raspberry Pi Zero, like we did in this video, this only has 512 megabytes of RAM. So if you have an extremely extensive network, something like this is probably not an ideal use case. Something that is more bare metal, or something like this that has, 8 gigs of RAM and an actual AMD processor and blah, 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 or Intel processor and all that, this is probably going to be better off because, this is an ARM processor, 512 megabytes of RAM running off an SD card. This is a Intel Pentium or Intel i5 Core i5 with 16 gigs of RAM and an SSD or an NVMe SSD inside. It's going to be fast, lightning fast responses. Do you need that? Absolutely not. If it's you and your spouse, or your spouse and a couple of kids, and you got a tablet and your wife has a laptop and blah, 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 blah. You only got a couple devices on your network. This is fine. This will do the job, no problem. But if you live in a tech connected house where you have tablets, phones, game systems, smart TVs, smart speakers, an Alexa, all this other stuff, go ahead, invest the extra money, get yourself a Raspberry Pi 4, Raspberry Pi 5, or put it on bare metal, because you're just going to be better off with that anyway. My recommendation, though, is going to be to run it on Linux. Every person that I talk to about Linux, no, I don't want to do Linux, it sounds scary, blah, 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 blah. Linux is not as intimidating as everyone likes it to make it out to be. If you are using Linux for things like this, it's relatively simple to set up, relatively simple to manage, and most of the time, Linux stuff, the developers understand that not everyone understands or wants to use Linux on an everyday basis, which is why they generally will make web interfaces that you can just type in the IP address, go to a port number, log in, and make the changes you need to make in a nice graphical little interface that you can easily pop in, do your thing. Not everyone wants to just enter commands. Anyway, that's going to do it for today's video. And remember, in today's video, we set up an AdGuard Home server on a Raspberry Pi Zero with an Ethernet port and blocked traffic that was trying to track us, figure out our location, or serve us ads. And we did it in no time for minimal cost, and the program was free. So if you found this video interesting, you liked it, or you want to see more content like this, go ahead and drop a comment down below, hit the subscribe button, and share this with your friends and family. We're looking at growing the channel as much as possible, trying to get more tech news or not so much tech news, but tutorials and stuff like that out there to try to help the community grow. So gigabytegrove.com is our website. Go check out our website. We did just launch a new merch store where you guys can get cool new Gigabyte Grove stuff with our logo on it, and the Command, Cultivate, and Conquer slogan that we just put out. So get yourself some cool stuff, and I'll drop links down below in the comments with Amazon affiliate links to all the stuff that I used in today's video, including the Raspberry Pi Zero, the SD card, the PoE hat, and the little reader that I ended up using, which I think was $15, and I've used this thing pretty much every day, which is great. So until next time, you guys have a great rest of your day. Stay safe, and we'll see you on the next video.